Hey, discerning listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Ariela and Biniyam episode. This was an episode from a while ago. Nice to meet you says, this is your 700th 90-day fiancé reaction video. Congratulations. Oh, really? So how do you know that I've done? Did you count all of them? Is there a way to count all of them? Or maybe you do a search? Anyway, 700. Yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? I put out about 2 a day, and I've been doing it for a year, almost 2 years now. So yeah, 700 videos. Just think about that. 700 reaction videos. I mean, by the time I'm done with this thing, I'm guessing it's going to be thousands upon thousands. Right? Lux says, any advice for someone who's interested in going to school for psychology to become a therapist? Well, listen to all my other episodes, and you can actually go to the website, psychologyinseattle.com, click on the categories button, and I have a category of episodes that's for beginners, therapists, or students, or something. I can't remember how it's worded, but there's a lot of info in there, and there's a fair amount of patron-only episodes that I go into this. But the one thing I'll say is the guiding principle that I find a lot of people do not follow when they are at your stage, Lux, is they don't focus on the following thing. Focus on what you want to be doing for a job. Don't think about the degree per se. Don't think about the school or the kind of things you do in graduate school. Think about what you want to do as a career, because being a therapist is a career, and there are different kinds of clients. There are different kind of venues to work in, and then I would work your way backwards. So, do you want to do therapy with kids? Do you want to do therapy with adults? Do you want to therapy with older people, or do you want to do therapy with people who have schizophrenia or bipolar or ADHD or autism, or do you want to work with couples, families, groups? Where? How much money do you want to make? That's another thing to think about. How long do you think your career is going to be? How many clients do you want to see a week? Do you want to be in private practice? Do you want to be at an agency? Do you want to do supervision eventually? Do you want to do research? Do you want to teach? Think about that, and then find people that are doing that and ask them, how did you get there? A lot of people, I find, they are thinking in terms of a degree. They're like, ooh, I want to get a doctorate. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to do with your life after you graduate? They'll be like, oh, I want to be a therapist. And I'll be like, you're wasting your time in getting a doctorate. A doctorate doesn't involve more education on psychotherapy in all likelihood. Doctorates are beyond masters, and doctorates usually provide additional topics aside from psychotherapy, like research, like assessment, like forensics, like whatever. Not all the time, supervision, education. But so now some people are like, well, I just really want to get a doctorate, and that's okay with me. That's fine. But anyway, that's my advice. Ariela and Biniyam, the choke out episode where Ariela's ex came to town. Courtney says, I got huge Twilight vibes from this plot. The new boyfriend fighting the dependable best friend ex is almost comically tropic way is making me laugh. In this almost tropic way is making me laugh out loud that they don't realize they're living in Twilight. Yeah, so does that make Biniyam, Edward, and the ex-boyfriend the werewolf guy? What was his name? I should know that. But I don't. Infamy says, regarding the bras, so the ex came with bras for Ariela. It's hard to find good bras in many countries. It's a common thing to ask people visiting from the West to bring bras. I didn't know that. Gogurt says, yes, she could have given Benny a heads up about the bras, but she shouldn't need to ask permission to get the clothing she needs any more than she should ask permission to dress a certain way or cut her hair. Men seeing it as solely a sexual or intimate thing is making it all about themselves. Maybe Benny could have had more empathy for Ariela here. Yeah, absolutely. To make bras, through the male gaze, as we call it, is sexist and ignores the reality of what it is to be a woman when it comes to bras. So, yeah, that's a good point. Mellifluous says, bras aren't inherently sexual, but the way he gave her the bras was really weird, LOL. If I was sitting next to my wife while her ex gifted her these bras, I'd be like, huh? Like Dr. Kirk said, the action is fine if good communication is had beforehand. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all Ariela had to do is be like, so, honey, I asked him to get bras. It's not a sexual thing. Don't get upset, but, I don't want to be with him, but it's really hard to get bras. Now, why didn't the mom, because I think the mom visits, but anyway, it's fine. Jenny and Sumit, when Sumit's like, oh, this is so triggering, when Sumit was like, calm down. And Jenny's being super calm in a very crazy making situation. And the misogynistic, patriarchal calm down was like, Akiko, I knew an Akiko when I was growing up. In my humble opinion, being used, so I was, they were in this episode talking, the friend at the Hare Krishna temple was saying to Jenny, he's using you, that kind of stuff. And I was like, using her for what? I think this is a frequent, traditional or old school way of looking at gender where women give men subservience and children and housework and men and sex, and men give money and a house and stability and a name and respectability and all that kind of stuff. And so this transactional way of looking at gender and heterosexual relationships is, for the man, it's like, I give you money and you give me sex. There's a win-win here. And to, get sex without giving a marriage, without giving legitimacy to the relationship is often seen as a man using a woman. If a man if heterosexual relationship, if sex is happening and marriage and the man doesn't want to get married, he's using her. And it's this old, now that might be happening, but we don't know anything about their sexual, preferences or anything. So to assume that she doesn't also like the sex if they're having sex, if it was more typical, anyway, I hope you get my point. Akiko says, in my humble opinion, being used could also mean just the emotional support and investment that one partner pours into another and that not being reciprocated. Jenny has been supporting Sumit through all his issues and challenges for 9 years, standing by his side even when she's getting insulted, disrespected, and lied to. Yeah, I mean, if that's what the friend was referring to in terms of used, then, I could see that point. But I don't know if that's what I don't know if that's what the friend was saying. But she didn't elaborate. Anna says, my first husband of 20 years projected his mom onto me, similar to how Sumit is doing, that I was angry at him all the time when I practically never was. Yeah, well, we all do this, by the way. We all displace and transfer our parents, our caregivers, onto our spouses. It's inevitable. And it's just a matter of, are you aware of it? And do you have some flexibility around it? How desperate are you to displace that? And if it's particularly traumatic growing up, as we imagine it might have been for Sumit, then the distortion becomes more pronounced. Good old Lean Donut says, it's moments like this that make me wish Sumit catfished Angela and told her to calm down. Yeah. Sometimes it's interesting to contrast the cast members. Like, what would Angela do in this situation? What would if Jenny were in Angela's shoes, because sometimes the behaviors look natural. They're like, well, of course they're doing that because that's what the situation calls for. But when you think about other people being in those positions, you're like, oh, not every human is like that. That behavior is particular to that person, and maybe people like them. Elia says, I won't lie, seeing Dr. Honda get as triggered as I do from this is cathartic for me. He's usually so calm and understanding, and finally Sumit did it, LOL. Yeah. I mean, there are things that trigger me as well, but yeah, there was something about that calm down interaction that I was like, whoa, what is happening? Like, because it was sort of a, it's not just that if it was just that, I'd be like, well, it doesn't. But we've been seeing this for seasons now, where he'll do that to her. And there were hints of that distortion and entitlement and, dare I say, misogyny, possibly in the past. She would get upset over reasonable situations, and he would say, calm down, calm down, calm down. But there was more of a politeness to his calm down in the past. This time it was really patronizing and superior and not good. It was just like, ugh. Jet Black says, when Dr. Honda says it's almost gaslighting, shit's got real. Yeah. I mean, to be clear, it wasn't, I don't think, gaslighting. It's the way the internet will use gaslighting. And listen to all my episodes on gaslighting. Corey and Evelin video, Angel, says, I'm actually surprised that Corey still tells Raul complaints about Evelin, as Raul made it clear he wants to be with Evelin. It's like Corey is just giving Raul ammunition to use against him later. If I knew my friend wanted to be with my partner, that person would be the last person I would go to for problems. Yeah, it's really hard to figure out what's going on with Raul. On one hand, he seems nefarious, and this video, this most recent episode, kind of pointed in that direction. And as I often say about him, it's like, well, maybe he's just like a really free spirit. Like, how many people harbor attraction to their friends' partners, but they don't mention it? Whereas Raul, maybe he's just being honest about it in a way that other people aren't. Or is he nefarious and he encourages it, or sees himself as, I'm going to get with her? The other thing we don't know is, with Raul, is he still attracted to Evelin? Because that was a long time ago that he talked about that, maybe years ago. So is it still there? I mean, I think Raul and Evelin, I think they said that Raul and Evelin haven't even talked to each other in a long time, which I don't know what that says, but yeah, there's a question mark there. Is Raul trustworthy or is he not? Because I could see it being on either end of the spectrum. I could see him being a very trustworthy person who's very authentic and honest about his feelings, and he just lays it all out there. I have friends who are like that. And then, or is he absolutely scheming behind the scenes? Ms. Jessica says, love your channel. I think Raul posted that video knowing full well what would happen. Yeah, so that, he takes a video of Corey and a couple women that it wasn't a double date or anything. And the video, the little snippet they showed of it, it looked really forced. I mean, I don't know that, but there's certain videos that are kind of natural. Someone falls down and everyone's laughing. It's a fun moment. And you're like, oh, I'm going to film this. This was just like they're at dinner and he just whips out his camera and he just pans the two women and to Corey, and Corey just looks at the camera. He's like, hi. So and then he posted that. And Corey goes to him and said, don't post that. And then he posts it. Yeah. Uncool. Uncool. Now, I've been actually thinking about this lately because I had a family member extended family member at Thanksgiving who was filming a lot of things, and we didn't know that she was filming. She was filming, and then you'd be having a conversation with someone, and then you'd look over and she's filming. She's just sitting there filming stuff. Like, you're at Thanksgiving, I have a large family. There's, 25 of us or something. Everyone's kind of chatting and doing things. A little, and I filmed a little bit, but I filmed like 5 seconds. It was just like 5 seconds and then we're done. And also I wouldn't post it and I haven't posted it, if I thought something would embarrass someone. Sometimes I'll even ask people, is it okay if I post this, that kind of thing. But But we had this family member who was seemingly filming a lot of things of people that didn't know they were being filmed. And this is like like some distant family member. And me and the pod wife were like, what are they doing with those videos? Did I say anything like that I don't want on the internet? What's happening, And again, it wasn't just like 5-second burst. It seemed to be like for tens of minutes, just like quietly filming people. And I don't think that she meant any harm by it or was trying to get anyone. But my point is that it's kind of interesting how now that all of us have video cameras in our pockets, there's a certain etiquette that we've developed that you don't post things, and you might not even record things that you believe other people would be uncomfortable with. And the reason why I bring up Thanksgiving is, when this distant family member was doing that, is that it reminded me that, well, how come no one else does that? There's something different about that person and or about their culture or something that resulted in something that you just don't see very often. And with Raul, it's really, and maybe in Ecuador it's different. I imagine it's not different. That one, you don't really film things without knowing that people are okay with it, and two, you definitely don't post them on public social media. Like, he didn't just post it to like his private Facebook page. It sounded like he posted it to like his public Instagram or something. And yeah, why in the world? Now, who knows? We don't know what was going on with Raul, but it certainly looked nefarious. Good old Lana says, I definitely relate to the lifetime of feeling abandoned and forgotten. Right. So I was talking about how with Corey, it looked like he might have, who knows, had a lifetime of feeling abandoned and forgotten because of the way his family were treating him. Because why would he be such a people pleaser and so denying of his own worth when it comes to Evelin, seemingly? Good old Lana says, I have developed similar tendencies of chasing people and always having to be the one who forgives and tries to salvage the relationship. Well, Lana, self-awareness is the first step. So that's great that you're aware of that. Now is the time for healing. Good old Jules says, ugh, this couple. It's triggering to me because I identify with Corey as a people pleaser and had gone through a time in my life where I was so desperate to maintain a marriage, it turned out to be an abusive one. I'm much better now and am still working on it, but people-pleasing behavior was so relatable to see. Yeah. Anon says, I don't feel bad at all for Corey with his I don't feel bad at all for Corey with his family not coming to his wedding. Corey and Evelin decided to have their wedding in the middle of the pandemic when open borders were uncertain and flights were constantly being canceled. His family would have risked their health, finances, and the possibility of being stuck in another country, all for the wedding of an already married couple that could have waited until the end of the pandemic. Yeah, absolutely. But it just seemed the way that it was happening to Corey, at least emotionally, was notable. It's one thing to say, I can't come. It's another thing to be like, brother of mine, I so much want to be there for you. You know how I kind of feel about Evelin, but, I want to be there for you. But I'm terrified of, there wasn't any emotional discussion around it. So, yeah. Ms. Corleone says, I do feel badly for Corey about how meh his family is about attending his wedding. The family keeps him at an emotional distance and is not super supportive, and Evelin is the same way. Coincidence? Yeah, exactly. Danielle and Mohamed videos. Kay Whitworth says, if she was financially stable and a nice person, I feel like Mohamed would have stayed in the relationship. Really? So to you, Kay, you believe that if Danielle was financially stable and a nice person, that Mohamed would have stayed married to Danielle. It's certainly possible, and we can't know what's in Mohamed's mind or heart, but I think some people might think that that's not true. Certainly, Danielle's financial instability and her behavior, controlling and otherwise, pushed him out the door, but we have to wonder what Mohamed, I think I've said this before, of all the couples that I've seen on 90 Day Fiancé where a lot of people question, particularly the family members, the legitimacy of the marriages and the relationships. They'll call the non-American that they're just in it for a green card. This is the only couple where I had a question mark there. Of course I can't know. And there's a chance that Mohamed was totally into it. But there were a lot of signs that he was not from the beginning, but we'll never know. Alice says, I think they were both naive and had drastically different expectations for what their marriage would be. Yeah, that's another possibility. And I think I hypothesized that with Mohamed, that, there's a possible storyline here where he was thinking, well, I really want to go to the States, and I met an American woman that, maybe things could develop with. I'm not super attracted to her now, but maybe if I get there, and maybe things will work out, and I don't really know. And then when he got to the States, he's just like, oh no, this isn't working like right away. That's the way it seemed. It seemed like right away as soon as he landed. It just, or very quickly. So that's another possibility. The annulment episode, Anna Joy says, my therapist used the term parentification recently. I appreciate your usage of the term during this example episode because it's exactly how my mom has always talked to me. My mom always said she was my best friend, not my parent, when I was growing up. Your videos are incredibly helpful to understand how it manifests in adult life. Yeah, I'm sorry you went through that, Anna. You deserved a parent who actually was a parent, not your best friend. Alexandra says, I admit that I have done what Danielle has done. My boyfriend used to be extremely avoidantly attached, and I used to be extremely anxiously attached. And during arguments, when he tried to walk out the door, I stood in front of it to block him so we could talk about it. I didn't know better at the time because I was in so much distress. Now, during arguments, I understand that he is trying to leave because he gets overwhelmed emotionally by the situation. He isn't trying to leave the relationship. So when he wants to leave, I let him, and we both agree to talk when he comes back. I remain calm, knowing that we will talk about it when he gets home. Good for you, Alexander. That's perfect. And you must have overcome a lot and worked a lot for the two of you to relate to it. And it's a really common dynamic that I talked about in the video between preoccupieds and avoidance, in that in stress, in attachment, threat, conflict, the avoidant wants to run. They're like, I'm done. And they're scared of vulnerability, and they want separation. They want to kind of cool down. They're extremely distressed internally. Sometimes they don't even know they're extremely distressed, by the way, because they cut themselves off from their emotions a long time ago. Their emotions are there, but they don't notice them. And then the preoccupied person is also very distressed, but pursuing and like, we need to talk about it. The preoccupied person is like, they're panicking, and it's like they're in a room that's filling up with water, and they're trying to find a door, and it feels like that. It feels like they're going to drown soon, and so they're just desperately looking for a door. And the preoccupied person only perceives the escape route through the other person. They think the only way to get rid of this terror in my heart is to get the other person to tell me that we're okay, is to get the other person to talk to me, even is to get the other person to make me feel like we're in a secure relationship. And so they demand, they're panicking. It would be the same as if someone was on the other side of the door of the room filling up with water, and they walk by and you're pounding on the door and they're like, hello. And you're like, let me out. And the person's like, hold on, stop yelling at me. And you'd be like, F you, open the goddamn door, you idiot. You're not going to play nice because you're panicking, and so the preoccupied person is like, you need to talk to me, and you need to reassure me, and you need to admit that you're wrong, and you need to stop that, and you need to, it's desperation. And obviously that's triggering to the avoidant person. And as the avoidant person avoids, that's triggering to the preoccupied person. And a very common dynamic is the preoccupied person will abusively, I'm just going to label it that way because it's, I think, technically against the law in a lot of jurisdictions, block the exit of the avoidant person. We'll say, you can't leave the room. And it's not okay. And if that's the only thing you do in that vein, it's still abusive, but it's just one abusive behavior. Preoccupied people, well, that's often the tip of the iceberg in terms of their abuse, the name calling, the demands, the invasions, the accusations, maybe even putting hands on. So I'm really glad, Alexander, that you're able to, you're like, you know what? I admit I used to do that, but I've gotten better. I've worked really hard, and here I am. So 2 thumbs up to you, Alexandra. Big Ed, Bears All episode. I don't know how to pronounce that. BR says, I'm so annoyed with Ed, always having to brag about his sexploits with women he's been with. My grandma taught me not to talk about other people under their clothes. But that's just me, I guess. Yeah, I mean, we don't know. It's possible that Ed and Liz or Rose have an agreement or a precedent that's been set that they talk openly about these things in public. You know, it's possible that Liz has openly discussed her sexploits with Ed and vice versa, and they have a precedent. It's also possible that Ed has no reason to believe that Liz and Rose are consenting to him talk about it. You know, I don't know where this lands in terms of the spectrum between just being impolite and actually unethically harming another person, but there's a question mark there. But at the very least, you can get annoyed with Ed the way he seems to talk about it in a braggy sort of way. Good old Lorraine says, I think for Rose, having more children was so important to her that if Ed had been honest about not wanting children from the start, the relationship would have ended before it began. Yeah. Both of them could have then looked elsewhere for someone more compatible. But Ed was so set on getting Rose for himself that he lied to her about this, and that was his biggest and worst lie of all. Yeah, and what commonly people will say is that Ed is a pedophile, or he is psychopathic or something, and he certainly can be. But from what I saw, at the very least, he was, I think, operating from an assumption that no one will love him and that he can never get his needs met like that. And so he believes he has to trick people into liking him. And there's a lot of people who operate from that. And I think that's how, and not only trick, but maybe even, so I don't know, but I've treated people who are like this, where they're faced with a question, of Rose says, I want to have kids. They're talking online. And he's thinking immediately, like, I don't want to have kids. I'm 50 something and I'm done with that. But very quickly says, well, I don't know, maybe. And then in this very quick calculus in his brain, he's thinking, well, I don't know, maybe. Who knows? Who knows what the future holds? Maybe she'll convince me to have kids. But there's another, if he just stopped and thought about it, he would say, no, I have a grown daughter that's older than Rose. I'm not going to start all over at the age of, mid-50s with more kids. It's just not going to happen. Plus, Rose has a kid and we can raise him. But anyway, so very quickly in his mind, he could have been like, no, and then like, well, maybe, and then but it's easier to say the well, maybe, when in reality it's a no. And then completely shoves it into the back of his mind because he knows that subconsciously and semi-consciously that if he thinks about that, it'll make him realize that he's lying to her. But he doesn't want to think about that because if he goes down that road, it leads to losing Rose, which he is so desperate to not do because he knows that because he has a lot of traumas about being treated like he's worthless and that no one will like him. Something along those lines. And so in that instance, is it a lie? Kind of. Is it more of a defense mechanism based on relational traumas in the past? That's the way I'd frame it. Doesn't make lying okay, and of course Rose was justified in reacting as she did. But we don't know. Now, on the other hand, maybe he flat out was lying and was trying to trick her. I don't think so, though, because if he was more conscious about the lying, he would have continued to lie about it. Like when they were talking by the pool on that episode, and she's like, kids, and he just said, I don't want to have kids. If he was really on a campaign to trick her to come to the States and get married, he would have continued to lie, but he didn't. I think he was faced with that question in a much more blunt way. And I think by that point he had, delusionally believed that she was a lock, that she was so desperate for a green card that she would never leave him. And so at that point he's like, well, then maybe I'm talking myself out of it to some extent. Anyway, it's hard to know. And to just automatically look at that and say he has to be a pedophilic, abuser, psychopathic, liar, it's possible, but there are other reasons why people do things. D-Dubs says, I really appreciate your discussion of friend zoning. I remember talking about this with guy friends decades ago and thought it was ridiculous. Luckily, those friends have matured. But it's also scary how some people believe it almost religiously. Yes, religiously is a good word for it. If they don't make a move really early on, they will be relegated to the friend zone. I still read about it on Reddit. It's akin to being a nice guy. Yeah, don't even get me started on this whole thing. So since the beginning of the inception of the term friend zone, I was immediately skeptical. There were some usages earlier on where I was like, oh, okay. But pretty quickly I was like, no, wait. Because it seemed, as I said in the video, it was always a woman with a guy friend, and the woman or the guy was hitting on her, and the woman didn't like him. And the guy, it's one thing to have a term, right? But what does the term stand for? Often what the term stands for is, you tricked me. I have the right to have you because that's what society has told me, because you've smiled at me and you've given me the time of day and you hung out with me. I deserve sex. I deserve you. And you're friend zoning me. You're not giving me, I gave you, it's like you're going into the McDonald's, you gave them the money and they're not giving you the food. You're like, hey, you friend zoned me. That's unfair. Instead of, she's not into you. She likes you enough to hang out with you, but she doesn't like you romantically. You're not being friend zoned. You were never out of the friend zone. You were always going to be friend zoned. You were always in the friend zone. You should be happier in the friend zone. Friends are hard to find, If she liked you, the chance, if you did go out, the chance of that relationship lasting is extremely small. And when you break up, you rarely hang out with them again. It's better to have a friend. Anyway, but I get it, and I've worked a lot with these incel, MGTOW people, and to every dude I've talked to who is in this world has a history of being rejected romantically and sexually, and they're very, very hurt. And some of them can admit this, but some of them can't. And even the Elliot Rodger case, if you followed that, he was desperate for companionship romantically, and was apparently extremely socially awkward at the same time, and found it very difficult at the age of, I don't know how old he was, 20 or something, to get anyone to like him, including other, of any sort of relationship. And so you have two choices when you're being rejected like that so consistently. You can say, it's me or it's them. Is it me? Am I insufficient? Am I unattractive? Am I awkward? Is there something about the way that I look or am that is inherently displeasing? Now, there are many variations to that. There's something deeply wrong with me and no one will ever like me. Or maybe I'm just not really practiced on how to talk to people, and I need more practice. Or maybe I haven't found the right person. Maybe the cheerleaders are not my type. Maybe it's more the librarians or something. You know, like there's some. So in this zone of, is it me? There's a sort of path forward and a destructive path, self-destructive path, or it's them. If it's them, what do I blame? Feminism. And that's what you'll see on Reddit and online. It's the feminazis. You know, like in feminist courses, they're teaching women to friend zone men. You know, now to some extent you could blame feminism, because feminists have been promoting the idea that as women you don't have to give it up for men just because they, you know, are paying attention to you, or just because they paid for dinner. So in some ways, you can blame feminism for giving women permission to say no when they don't want to say yes. You know? But what they'll say is that feminism is infecting the mind of the woman and making them just hate men in general, or even they'll even go further, as if it's this grand conspiracy for literally half the population of the planet, you know, 4 billion women on the planet, to purposely use their sexuality and their power to control men. And you'll see this on Reddit. It is bizarre. And some of the most reasonable dudes will believe this because they're so hurt and they don't want to believe it's them. And if you're narcissistically oriented, which a lot of dudes are, meaning it's not me, it's them, it couldn't possibly be my fault, it has to be other people's fault. How could this be happening? And it's so weird because, you know, I've had clients like this where they literally asked like 2 women out on a date, and maybe one of them they had one date with, and their full catalog of rejection comprises of like 2 or 3 instances. And I'm like, what world do you live in? I mean, everyone, you know, on average, the amount of rejection you go through before you find even just someone to go on a date with, you know, it's a lot. There's a lot of like, nah, you know, you're not for me before you find, you know, mutually swiping right in person. Anyway, so, you know, I get it, but so it's feminism or it's this friend zoning thing, and it's all based partially on this premise that men are entitled, you know, because women don't think this way, right? When a woman hits on a man, which happens all the time, and the man says in a heterosexual relationship, the man is like, yeah, not into it. The woman is like, oh crap, I'm being friend zoned. The woman's like, oh, well, he's not into me. You know, because it happens, you know? So now we'll also say that there's all these other elements to this that need to be discussed. I won't go into all of them, but one of them is that we tell men that not all the time, but there's a lot of messages telling men that in order to be a proper man, they have to be masculine and aggressive and hitting on women and trying to get sex and trying to get women, you know, scoring with women. And it puts a lot of pressure on men. And we also tell men that if they can't get the woman, they're not a real man. They're, you know, there's these really awful words that people use that are just ridiculous. And so it's not like men wake up in the morning and be like, he, I'm going to be this ridiculous version of a human. They're taught to be that way. And that's why we see the trend. That's why we see so many men like that. And it's not just in the States, it's around the world. Since I'm a podcast that's all around the world, there are people from all sorts of countries, Saudi Arabia being one, where people, you know, talk with me and talk about how this idea I'm talking about, it's like, I'm being rejected, it must be them, you know, and there's a whole weird echo chamber online that will support these ridiculous notions. And it all comes from hurt. It all comes from pain. And society just hands them a recipe for how to get out of that pain, how to not feel like it's you. You know, what we have to do is reach out to these guys, which I have done, and say, I know you're in pain, but let's start there. You're in pain. You're alone. You feel rejected. It's not you. It's not them. It's neither. It just, bad luck. You're looking in the wrong place. Maybe there's some tweaks to your personality you can make. Just little adjustments, not major adjustments, just little things. There's a lid for every pot. Maybe you're setting your standards too high because you're trying to show off to your friends. These are all things that you've injected into your brain from society, and we need to start looking at that. And there's a way forward. There's a way to companionship. Let's focus on that. Don't focus on what's on Reddit in terms of what they're saying about this, because it's toxic. It's completely fake and unreasonable. It's a weird conspiracy theory that a lot of people adhere to. Let's get you companionship. And I've worked with clients like this. What's getting in the way? Because like I said, for some guys, literally it's 2 women that they talk to and they got rejected, and they're just like, I don't know what's happening. It's because we teach men from, if you have an unsophisticated understanding of what dating is supposed to be, and 2, you were rejected a lot as a kid by abandoning parents or critical parents, or cold parents, you can have a real sensitivity to abandonment, obviously. And so when you go and try to, you're desperate for companionship because you've never had it with anyone in your life, and you're extremely sensitive to rejection. And so, you talk to 2 women and you get rejected, and it's just like, and anyway. D. Shelby Wells says, thank you again, Dr. Honda. And then it just looks like a really nice comment after that. I won't read the whole thing, but Shelby, thank you so much. Warms my heart that we're seeing eye to eye, and I'm glad that you're getting your corrective experiences. And for the record, there are other nice comments that I have read as well, and I deeply appreciate it. It really, especially ones where, where Shelby goes into detail about how they, have been watching the channel. Anyway, Living Like Cammie says, hello, Dr. Kirk. I'm a big watcher of you. I'm a big time watcher of you. I was wondering if you could talk about non-monogamous consensual relationships. It would be really interesting to hear about what you have to say about the topic. Thank you. Greetings from Italy. Well, I've talked about it in other episodes, mainly audio episodes, and some reaction videos, like with Tariq and Hazel. But what do I say very quickly? Consensual or ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, open relationships are wonderful for those who want to do it. In the same way that sex with another person is wonderful if you want to do it. Relationships with another person is wonderful if you want to do it. And my experience with people, and it's hard to know given the amount of oppression that non-monogamous people go through in our society, particularly around the world, I believe that people are oriented this way, or not, right? That some people are oriented toward monogamy, and some people are oriented towards non-monogamy. I'm oriented towards monogamy, and I won't go into the details in terms of my exploration personally, and exploration mentally and emotionally, and I guess to some extent experientially. That tells me that one is that I'm happily married to my wife and have no desire and to be with other people. And I hear from other monogamous married people, clients or friends, who are happily married, but they're deeply unhappy because they're not getting their needs met by, through a non-monogamous relationship arrangement. And I hear their pain and their struggle and their urges and really just how much pain they're going through being in a monogamous relationship. And so with my experience with clients and other people, it just seems like some people are, and it's hard to know, right? Because sometimes you want to be with other people periodically or temporarily, or your marriage isn't going that well. So sometimes it's hard to figure out, usually over time though, in multiple situations, people can start saying, no matter what the situation is, I don't want to be limited to just one person. I want to have many loves, as they put it. And what will often happen, particularly in the past, was because people need attachments. And so if you have one way to get your attachment needs met through monogamy, and because that's the only thing that's society will allow, then you'll get your attachment needs met to some extent through monogamy, but you'll be constantly cheating or wanting to cheat all the time because you are not monogamously oriented. And then the cheating happened, and the shame and the pain and all that stuff. Whereas if we just had an arrangement from the beginning, if people were allowed to know for themselves at the age of 18 or 25 that, I'm monogamous. In the same way, actually, in the past, when it came to the amount of oppression that we would do to gay and lesbian people, they would be forced into, essentially, by society, into heterosexual relationships. And then because they're living a lie and they're not getting their needs met, they often would cheat with people of the same sex. Not all the time, obviously, but you could imagine the impulse at the very least, and the terrible unhappiness that happens for everyone involved. Well, polyamory is the same thing. Non-monogamy is the same thing. And so we have to help people to know that this is okay. But you have to know it about yourself and be with other people who want that. There's a whole group of people, the same way that if you're gay, find other gay people to date, right? Don't try to make heterosexual people gay, right? If you're poly, if you're non-monogamously oriented, don't find, monogamous people and try to make them poly. Find other poly people, right? But we have to allow people to know that about themselves, and we have to have a society that normalizes that because it's fine. And all the panic and the phobia, well, what about the kids? Research shows it's fine. In the same way that people had panic about gay people raising children, you're like, you need a man and a woman. Nope. Turns out data doesn't show that. And of course it doesn't show that. It's ridiculous. That children can develop just as well in a same-sex parent relationship. And it goes for poly kids that grow up in poly families. It's fine. And I've treated poly families with kids. I've talked extensively with the kids about what it's like to have poly parents, to have non-monogamous parents living in the home, not just like dating other people, but like, 3 moms and 2 dads in the house, and then say 5 kids aged, range from 5 to 18 or something. And in my anecdotal experience, some of these kids are the most well-adjusted kids on the block. I mean, one, they have a lot of parents to pull their weight in terms of taking care of the kid. 2, they have a understanding of how society is stupid because they get a lot of, and so you kind of want that in a kid. You like, for me, I grew up, Japanese in a racist society, particularly back then, and would experience racism against me, and realized, very early in my life, society is stupid. People are dumb, Culture doesn't know what it's talking about most of the time. Very early in my life, and not only being Japanese, but also being half Japanese. It's like because Japanese people would be racist to me as well. That I learned. So anyway, a lot of the kids in the poly families were in the same way that kids with gay parents or lesbian parents also grew up with like this baked in skepticism to culture because of how stupid culture is. And it's something that is kind of great to learn at a young age. And then you can start to reject things like when you learn, like for me, when I learned that culture was stupid, I didn't frame it this way, but I pushed back on toxic masculinity. Like, I was getting to that age, 15, 16, 17, where there were a lot of fights. There were a lot of, fist fights among boys and young men. And I, participated in them, but also knew it was just a game that dudes played to justify themselves that was told to them. And because the question was, why don't women do this as much? How come our women, our friends who are girls, how come they're not fighting on the weekends at a party? Why are the dudes doing? There's nothing inherently about dudes that causes this. It's like there's some message we're getting. Anyway, so non-monogamy is a thing that people are oriented towards, and we need to wake up and we need to help people and support them, and help them to feel okay and to be able to come out of the closet and discover themselves and meet up with other non-monogamous people, and then everyone will be happy. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.